Alright, so in this video I'm going to be introducing you to what I am talking about when I'm talking about enlightenment, because the way that I talk about enlightenment seems to be a whole lot different from everybody else. And, well, not everybody else, but just a whole lot of people who seem to think about enlightenment as like this path to the light or something like that. And to me, that's kind of inverted. It's really a pathway or a journey into the darkness. And so just to understand what I'm talking about, we could just go to this quote by Carl Jung on the subject, where he says that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. Okay? One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness, by making our darkness conscious. Okay? So, when I'm talking about enlightenment, what I'm talking about, just defining the term here, to enlighten just means to enlighten someone, to give someone more knowledge about a particular subject or topic. In this case, the subject or topic is ment, M-E-N-T, which is, we've talked about this word a lot. It comes from the Latin word mens, which means mind. So enlightenment, if you put it all together, it's to gain knowledge of the mind from the principles of from the general principles of natural law. The mind is all, because the mind is what we're talking about when we're talking about thoughts, emotions, actions, all human consciousness, all of the aspects of human consciousness. That's what the mind is. To gain more knowledge of that, usually to enlighten that, to shed light on that, usually means that you have to shed light on the darkness itself, okay? And that's what we're talking about with these pillars that I define by what I mean by enlightenment, because the term enlightenment means many different things to many different people, and I just want you, as always, to understand my definitions of these terms, because, I'm the one who's doing most of the speaking here, and so you have to understand what I'm talking about. And I don't want you to use somebody else's definition of enlightenment, because that'll confuse people, or that'll confuse you, because that's not how I'm using the term. So that's how I'm using the term enlightenment, and we could really start to better define this term as I continue talking about it. So first of all, I want to point out that enlightenment has nothing to do with going out into the mountains of some Tibetan village and living up there and isolating yourself from the universe and meditating all day and trying to be pious and all that stuff. That's not what it means. Enlightenment has nothing to do with, basically denying yourself the challenge, the great challenge of a very modern living, okay? So to me, enlightenment is the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness, the mind, thoughts, emotions, actions, consciousness itself, being mindful of that, having knowledge, remembrance, being aware of and cognizant of the mind in all of its aspects, being aware of what's going on around you and within you, which is the same thing as within, so without, subject and object being the same thing. Enlightenment is knowing the human condition and knowing how to exist within the reality by which the human resides. And it is truthful. It is being truthful of the aspects of consciousness that are isolated from the rest of the world. These are your thoughts and your emotions. No other individual can know what you're thinking and feeling unless you express them to the other person. Being enlightened means being truthful to everyone about these thoughts and these feelings, no matter how uncomfortable they may be to express to other people. And it's also knowing the objective difference between right and wrong behavior, right and wrong action. And if you know that stuff, then if you know that stuff and you practice all these things, mindfulness, subject and object, non-duality, truthfulness, and knowing what the right things to do are and what the wrong things to do are, then you're well on your way to becoming a more enlightened individual. And also it protects you from being corrupted by the evils that exist in our world. And so, enlightenment is knowing the three aspects of consciousness and unifying them, and thus acting with true wisdom in your life. This is actually true self. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about sovereignty. Okay, this is true self-discipline, true self-mastery, and it's self-love. But it's the type of self-love to where you recognize that if there is no disconnect between you as an individual and the collective as a whole, then if you love yourself, then you love everybody else equally as well. As we follow this process, we'll find that this isn't really about learning how great and how loving and how awesome we are, because we already know all of that stuff. We have an ego. We get it, okay? It's really about learning about how evil we are, which is awesome and more enjoyable to learn about anyways, okay? And so again, using another quote from Carl Jung, or just repeating this part of the quote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, okay? We already know that we're beings of light. So we have to go into the place where we have to make the darkness, our darkness, conscious to ourselves. We have to become aware of this darkness. And so to me, the primary focus of enlightenment, the practice of enlightenment, is in the practice of non-aggression and self-discipline. Because the only time when people aren't acting in accordance with natural law is when someone's rights are being infringed upon. Further, those who know that they can inflict severe violence upon humanity through the knowledge of self-defense. So these are people who know how to utilize self-defense. They've been practicing self-defense their entire lives, or at least 10 to 15 years. They know how to defend themselves. They know how to kill somebody if they have to. And so they have a capacity for evil that they're well aware of. They know, when you're practicing boxing, for example, and you start punching a bag, and then one day you punch a bag so hard, and you realize that this could really seriously hurt somebody if you hit them. That takes time and practice and attention. But that's somebody who knows their capacity for evil. And in knowing that, they still choose to only use their training in self-defense. They know that they could beat somebody up in a situation where somebody's being, annoying, but they don't do it. And so these people who know that they can beat other people up are the only ones who are actually in a quality moral position to actually truly understand right from wrong, because for them, it's actually a choice. And so on one hand, you have these group of people, very small group of people, who are aware of their capacity for evil. They're aware of the violence that they can cause to other people if they so chose, but they keep all of that in check. But then you have this other, much larger group of individuals who are not aware of their capacity for evil, who haven't thought about the ramifications of the possibility of them being violent, dangerous, evil individuals, because they don't believe that they are capable of doing it. But if you're human, and if you live in the modern world, in the world of cars, in the world of weapons, firearms, in the world of celebrity and influencer status online, anyone in a particularly bad, resentful, remorseful, guilty, terrible circumstance could find themselves in a position where they're causing severe violence upon humanity. But they're just unaware of the fact that they're capable of doing that. And so they're like wild, dangerous animals, because they're not acknowledging the fact that in a particular situation, they could find themselves causing severe violence upon humanity. Those people have to become aware of their capacity for evil, and that's why we're talking about this stuff, because so long as you're a human, so long as you're an individual, you're capable of doing this stuff, no matter how much you think that you're not, okay? And the only way to protect ourselves from not doing these things, from not falling into these unconscious violent traps, is to just acknowledge and be aware of this, and that's what we're talking about on this in this video. And we're going to continue talking about that by talking about these two pillars that enlightenment rests upon. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about the shadow and the two shadows that these two pillars cast down. And so that thus making 4 pillars to be aware of. But in this video, we're just going to be talking about the first 2 physical pillars. Pillar number 1, the pillar of non-aggression, which is the sacred feminine, the non-aggression principle. It just simply states, do not engage in violence. And it just states, do not immorally initiate non-rightful use of physical power to coerce, constrain, or compel the rightful physical behavior or free will choice of another sentient being. Don't murder, don't rape, don't thieve, don't trespass, don't coerce, and don't lie. It just means do not steal. We talked about this in the 6 wrongs video. Don't engage in theft of any kind. Don't take life that isn't yours. Don't take stuff that isn't yours. Don't take rights that aren't yours. Respect others' rights, free will, and life, other people's lives. This is really the golden rule. This is the path to enlightenment. It's pretty simple. Don't engage in violence. Okay? And in this day and age, pay particularly close attention to lying. Be truthful when you're talking about your thoughts and emotions. because that's where people are making their most mistakes. That's why I'm pointing that out. Your thoughts and your emotions, expressing your thoughts and your emotions to other individuals, and doing it by paying particularly close attention to the words that you speak, being precise with your words, because when you're being truthful about your thoughts and emotions, you can hurt people's feelings very quickly, very easily, because you're going to be saying things that are truthful. Truth hurts, okay? So, the second pillar is the pillar of self-defense, the sacred masculine, the self-defense principle. And this pillar states that sentient beings have the inherent right to use force to defend themselves from the initiation of violence conducted upon them by another. Your own body, your free will, your stuff, your place of dwelling, even your actions, all of these are your rights. You own your rights, and they're all your property. And because of that, you have every right to defend these things if they're being attacked from an aggressor, from a violator. So if you come into a situation where an individual or multiple individuals are infringing upon your rights, it's well within your rights, and really, in fact, it really becomes your responsibility and your moral obligation to society, to the collective as a whole, to defend your being and your property at all costs until the violator is subdued. And really throughout, this channel, I've talked about many reasons why living in some state of love and care and compassion is really the default state that we should be expressing our consciousness in. The expansive force for consciousness being love that lets us become open to truth and knowledge and gain understanding and ultimately sovereignty for ourselves and freedom for all. And really, there's no reason to live your life in fear if you live in the Western world today, because we live in one of the safest environments in human history. We've got like 3 separate layers of safety that allows us to live in a place of love almost our entire lives, close to 98 to 99% of our lives in a state of love, or we should be. We got these layers of safety. We got a military that protects us from outside invaders. We've got a police force that's largely not corruptive, that's not corrupted, and that protects us from local violence. And for the vast majority of us, for the first time in human history, almost all of us have a house or an apartment or something that we live in with a door that we can lock. And this is amazing stuff that we take for granted. We take for granted that we live in the least oppressive environment in human history. And so there's no reason to not live in a state of near constant love and expanding consciousness for our entire lives almost. But with that being said, there are still violent predators out there, and love is only a weakness against these violent predators. I always say you can't love a grizzly bear into not eating you alive, okay? And so people who say that you fight evil with love are either ignorant to their own stupidity, or they're actively participating in the psychotic evil themselves and are trying to convince you into adopting a strategy that is guaranteed to fail in the face of evil, okay? So, we have to understand that there is no reason to take this environment of love and safety for granted, okay? We got these 3 wonderful layers of safety, and within a generation, it could all disappear. That's something that we have to understand. We have to become part of the solution. We have to become part of the protector class, okay, that protects these 3 layers of safety and utilize that journey as part of our initiation into the path to enlightenment, because understand that these 2 pillars have a lot to do with protecting these rights, protecting our fellow family and society's rights as well. And we can participate in that process by learning how to do this, okay? And so second, even in our current ultra-safe environment, there are still many scenarios that exist where you may have to defend yourself and your property from an act of violence. Just because we have these 3 layers of safety doesn't mean that you won't find yourself walking down a dangerous alley and have to figure out what to do in that particular situation. These types of violence occasions still occur, and even though it's not healthy, you should still perceive the environment for what it truly is, which is a truly dangerous environment. And then the reason why we're talking about all of this is because there's an entire half of our physiology that we're going to briefly talk about, and we'll talk about much later in a later video, that opens up, that we're not aware of, exists, that has very interesting idiosyncrasies that we have to be aware of. And so, what I'm talking about is when fear, the expression of fear, permeates through our being, through our body. Fear allows our body to do some interesting things. Cortisol and adrenaline is released in our body, and other chemicals that make us more actually more effective at defending ourselves for a very short period of time. And we have to be aware of this stuff, because when violent threats occur, an entire different state of being occurs within us as well, okay? And so this is the reason why humans have fear hormones in the first place, because fear causes a change in our environment, in our inner environment. It forces blood and energy to go, to basically go away from our organs where we prefer them to be, but into our arms and legs, so we can decide whether to run or fight against this opposing force. This is fight, flight, or freeze. This is the sympathetic nervous system, of which you ought to become accustomed to, because it's running the show when your life is on the line. Okay, this isn't something that you want to experience for the first time ever when you have an opponent in front of your face. This is the side of you that we're talking about when we're talking about your dark side, when we're talking about this side of you that you almost change into a completely different individual, and you almost change into a completely different individual because you're using a completely different part of your nervous system, which is the part of your body that's your brain, which is part of the body that's most closely associated with the you, okay? And it goes from, it acts very differently from the parasympathetic nervous system. And if you don't know how to deal with this influx of high octane energy, well, you're gonna make mistakes, okay? And when violence is occurring around you, that's the last place where you want to be making mistakes. You want to be making mistakes on the practice field, not in the game field, all right? And so weird things happen in that situation. And so, like I said, we're going to talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in detail in a later video, because it's interesting, but the point is here, in order to become more enlightened, you can't ignore or hide away from this part of who you are, this side of who you are when the chips are down, okay? You have to acknowledge that we have fear built into our system for a reason, and when it's activated, it puts you into a completely different and heightened state of existence. It's very similar to, like, you're about to be in a street race for your life, and you've been driving a Toyota Corolla your entire life, and then suddenly somebody like shows up and he's like, here, have my Formula One race car. It'll give you a much higher advantage to winning this race. And you go, thanks, guy. And you sit in the car and you immediately slam into the side of the wall because you've never experienced that much power, that much energy in your life. You could not even believe that there is that much power within you. But when your life's on the line, that you have that kind of power within you, I guarantee it, okay? And so, remember, this is all about understanding the human condition. Once you know how to think while experiencing a calm and safe environment, then we have to learn how to think while experiencing an intense and dangerous environment, because a lot of things change within us, and it's based upon which parts of these autonomic nervous systems is activated, okay? And this is why athletes are capable of choking, even though they're great athletes on the practice field. They go into the game and then they're nervous. And this is because things change. Adrenaline is flowing within them. And really, this is what separates the greatest athletes of all time from the not so great athletes, the good athletes, the ones who never really won the championship but were really good, the Allen Iversons, people like that, okay? It's because the greats learned how to use this adrenaline. They learned how to use this this other side of them to do things, to do feats that they couldn't even believe that they could do. And it's like when you ask them about it, they're like, it's like time slowed down. I could see things before they happened, stuff like that. All right? That's what this side of us is capable of engendering within us when the situation arises, if we understand how to utilize it. Okay? And so, martial arts is actually a prime example of the utilization of both of these pillars of enlightenment, and that's why martial arts is often in the East used as a tool, as a method to reach enlightenment, okay? And it's great for the shadow work. It's great for all of that stuff because that's what it does. We'll talk about that in a later video as well. And so, the first lesson in martial arts that's always taught to initiates is the first pillar. Don't engage in violence. Do not engage in violence. And then the rest of the training from then on, from that first lesson on, always has to do with the second pillar, the pillar of self-defense. How to defend yourself if you're being accosted. How to defend yourself when violence is occurring upon you. No real martial art is a martial art where they teach you how to be violent upon other people, how to impose your will. Everything is in a state of self-defense, okay? And so the third and fourth pillars are represented by the shadows of the two pillars cast. And these two shadows mark like the dark pathways that lead to enlightenment. There's these dark truths that I didn't get into in this video talking about these two pillars, but there's some truths that we have to acknowledge when we're talking about these two pillars, these two ideas of enlightenment. And so that's the shadow work that we're going to have to start talking about. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about what I'm talking about when I'm saying the shadow, and then we're going to talk about the two shadow pillars in the video after that. All right, and so I'll see you there, and have a great rest of the day, guys.